Okay, well, good morning, everybody. My name's Steve Lowenthal. I'm Kinneo's U.S. CEO. Happy to be joining you, I guess, morning for many of us, but afternoon probably for those folks on the East Coast. Happy today to join you today and talk about, I guess, the topic's great expectations, what everyone should know before they send out an RFP. This is really our take on how we think about e-learning and in essence, the components that go into pricing an e-learning project. So happy to share this with you today. I'd love to get your input as we work through this, understand what are we missing and what maybe you look at differently. So as we go through today, you will see in your GoToWebinar panel a little icon for questions down here. You probably don't have as many buttons and stuff on your version of it, but you hopefully should have some version of it. You should see something called questions. If you click on the little plus sign there, you should expand that and be able to see an entry field for questions. So I guess my first question for all of you is, can you hear me okay? And is the screen sharing working out all right? So I can ask people just to confirm that everything's working like it's supposed to. That would be great. I got a yes. Thank you. Throughout the presentation, my colleague Sabrina is on the line with us. So feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation. We hope it's an interactive session. She'll interrupt as we go through. And Sabrina, can you just confirm we have your audio correct?
Yes, good morning, everyone. I'm Sabrina, and I will be helping with the questions today.
If you pop your questions in there, Sabrina will interrupt me, and we'll do our best to try to answer them as we move through the presentation. So just a couple introductory slides before we jump into the meat of the content. Kennyo works with organizations globally. We're about a 200-person organization today with offices in Chicago, where I sit, as well as people across the U.S. Our parent company's in the UK and Brighton, England, with offices in London as well. And now we also have offices in Australia and New Zealand, as well as partners in Israel, Sweden, South Africa, I think some across the globe. Some of the clients we work with today. And then just real quickly, we partner with organizations both, from a services point of view, custom developing e-learning solutions, as well as implementing learning portals, and then we often combine those two companies to create solutions that meet business, that solve for our clients. That includes induction and onboarding, partner and channel policy training center, content, includes sales and product knowledge and process team in Kennyo, and a big part of that role is often pricing proposals. So whether we get an RFP in or we're working with a client that we know well, each project's a little bit different. And one of the things I think is helpful dialogue as a whole, consider the value of different projects and the resources, whether you're using a vendor or partner like Kineo to do that development, or you're looking internally. And my frustration certainly is, I think that that discussion often gets oversimplified to, well, are you using a lot of animation, or are you using a little bit of animation? It's the presentation of the content. That's certainly one factor, but it's not all the factors. So today what I want to talk about is, let me go back here, is five criteria which we've identified in terms of where we look at in terms of complexity or level of resourcing required for a given project. So that's starts with content acquisition. It considers design, the solution, or presentation of content that I mentioned. Considers the technical requirements for that solution, and then testing. And we'll talk about each of these, but looking at those holistically, then regard for when you work with partners to be learning, just curious today about how clear that pricing and how well do you understand the rationale for how people come on invest for a given project or solution. So just for you to answer the question, that would be just to get a sense of where we're at. Some of the answers are coming in. Well, they're kind of all over the place in terms of when you get quotes or for development as to sometimes it's real clear why people are the rationale for pricing. Sometimes it's not. So I guess that's why people are here today. So thanks for joining us. So I'm going to go through these 5 criteria and again jump in with questions as we go, and hopefully we have a good discussion together. So the first thing is content acquisition. I think this is one that often gets overlooked in the process. So when you can think about the content acquisition process, it can really be, we work on projects, and I'm sure you initiate projects in your organizations, which would start from anywhere from, hey, we have a business problem. So there's a whole set of processes that need to go and be put in place there. So everything from, you might organize focus groups, you might create surveys to gather data, you might go do field work and shadow people to go to define what that content is. So the starting point could be critical to what's the effort involved in ultimately developing a piece of e-learning as your solution. Then, once we start to acquire content, well, how many people are involved? Who are they? We've worked on projects where there's literally 10 plus people involved in that decision-making process. And if you start to get into designs like goal-based scenarios or scenarios and simulations where you need to come up with 3 to 4 choices for each turn in the scenario, and then for each of those you have to try to write a small piece of tutoring and suggest what the right answer is. If anybody who's ever been involved in those kinds of projects, just making a single decision point, getting agreement, a single point, could be really a complicated process and can take a long time. More here, e-learning and content that's more factual in basis. So for teaching, we're creating learning around compliance training. Tends to be a bit more subject matter, such as sales or training that you might be working on, or customer service training. Then finally, what's that decision? Is there a final person who's going to have a say-so, and that if there's disagreement among make the final decision? Do we need to have a group discussion, pull everybody together when there's disconnect between things? So thinking about all those pieces, these are probably just a few of the overall pieces, but content acquisition can take quite a bit of time. I mean, one good story I can share is we were working with a client doing customer service training in the call center environment. So one of the things that we were trying to display, so we went to our subject matter experts that we were working with to ask for an example of that. It turned out we were working with 3 or 4 different subject matter experts, and each picked a different example of what is a good, what's an appropriate way to show empathy in a call center environment given a set of circumstances. At the end of the day, believe it or not, the decision for what was the appropriate example to share went all the way up to the head of this division of the company because there was just such difficult topic. So understanding, what's the content we're teaching, what's the process we're going to use to get to decisions? Who are the people involved? And what's the starting point can all factor in considerably into the effort to get through that content acquisition process. So here's the language we use as we talk about this internally and with our clients in terms of content acquisition. So we talk about level 1, which I think is most commonly referred would be described as rapid e-learning in an industry. So if we're working with a client, we would say, well, your internal team is really taking the lead on acquiring that content from subject matter experts. Content's well-defined. It's being delivered to us in writing, documents, PowerPoints, or a workbook. The work we're doing with you as your vendor or partner in this process is really focused on details, collecting stories and examples, for example. The vendor's team will review existing content, invite gaps, and provide clarifying questions. And really, it's a bit of an arm's length process relative to the depth that it could be. So we're the partner asking for might participate to help back and forth. As you kind of start to step forward, where I think most development lives, from our experience, is that your partner's team is leading the content acquisition part. There is some written documentation that you're starting with. There's a relatively small group of subject matter experts on your team as a client who are going to be responsible for fleshing out the content. But there's going to need to be a fair amount of discussion and legwork that goes into defining that content. So that's done through workshops and calls and discussions. Now, there's much more in-depth projects, right? So your partner's ID team's going to may lead the process, but there's significant in terms of the starting. We're using a lot of different techniques, from sending out surveys to running folk shadowing people, and there's broad set of that input in. So that's a process. Could take months really to work through to a project. So let me take a breath and pause and just wonder, any questions? Does that sort of align with how you think about things as you work on projects internally or with external partners? So I think we see a okay. No questions. I'll keep going. I think that the second area is design. So again, the approach to design can draw, all these things are linked. So I'll continue to probably use some of the same language, but the design approach you use has significant impact on all of the other processes. It has an impact on content acquisition, has a impact on the technical effort, and so on and so forth. So this is really a bit of an oversimplification, but one of the big differences in terms of design is on one end you tend to have much more linear projects, and then compared to that you might have a much more exploratory course. So in each of these approaches you may say, hey, it's 30 minutes of e-learning or 30 minutes of seat time. But on the other hand, if it's linear, I'm going to go through 25, 30 slides. That's 30 minutes. On the other hand, it's very open-ended. It's really there as a resource for people to explore and use, or to work through scenarios where they're going down different paths and they're branching. To accomplish the second, you're going to need a lot more content, a lot more effort to gather that content. So it can be quite a different effort level. So I thought it'd be helpful just to share a quick example. So this is your typical linear e-learning program. So see if we can get by this. So it starts with, apologize, I should tee this up. Starts with a little introductory video. So in this case, yeah, what most people I think are used to seeing in an e-learning program. I mean, really, the primary navigation is back and next in this case through the arrows. You know, there's content on each screen, and again, a linear navigation experience as you work through it. You compare that to, so as you work through this, we set up a problem for you. And we ask you some questions as you work through that. But as I just work through, this is a single page, there's also some tutorial content. So as you work through this, there's different content that you might need to go through that helps you inform your decision as you work through that. There's technical documentation that sits behind it, so you need to create that documentation that people can look at and download. There's technical documents in this case, so as you move through it, different documents might be associated with each decision that you make. So now I've moved in, there's a couple different documents. So you can see, to create the same single screen where there's back and next buttons in this case, there's a depth to the content and material available, and that's how, I guess, an example of how different design approaches can drive the amount of effort significantly that's involved in creating a given course. So just to kind of boil that down into kind of the simple principles that we apply when we're trying to analyze the upper level of design. So level 1 is primarily presentational with maybe a few focused exercises and activities. Level 2, still pretty linear, but now you start to drop in things like a story or a case study that's more interactive. And then level 3 is, you're using a lot of nonlinear approaches such as goal-based scenarios, or you gamify it, so people are exploring. Often that design approach requires multiple layers of content as well as branching content, that branching set of screens that people can work their way through. So that's number 2. Number 3, this is what most people talk about when they try to say level 1 versus level 2 versus level 3 learning. Is content presentation. There's a lot of dimensions to this. So there's simple things like, are you using illustrations? So is a graphic artist who's going to work on this going to need to hand draw different illustrations? Are you going to use stock images? Do you need to do a photo shoot? Are you using standalone images, which I can grab off an iStock or a Shutterstock? Or do I have more complex scenes where I need a given background, and then I will need to cut out and put people into those scenes? For a graphic artist, you're talking now taking from 20, 30 minutes put together those graphics to maybe 2 to 3 hours. How are you treating graphics, right? So there's a lot of different treatments we can apply to graphics. We can simply put them in a kind of Polaroid frame, or we can cut them out and put a little background on them. So again, defining all these details has a significant impact on the amount of effort from the graphics and development team to put that course together. How many layers per screen? So I was out meeting with somebody week before last, and they had told me that because they wanted continuous music in a articulate storyline course, they actually made out 150 layers in articulate storyline to accomplish that. So it's one screen, but it's 150 layers. So thinking about how complex are these screens obviously has a significant impact on the resources needed to create these courses. Then animations can vary quite considerably. There's you talk about an animated screen, but an animated screen can have many different meanings. So in this case here, I'll share 3 different animations with you to give you a sense of the different style of animation. And I guess the question I have for you, and I'll share the answer in a moment, is which of these took the most effort to create? So this is sort of we see a lot more of this style of work today, kind of a handwritten, hand-illustrated approach to animation. So in this case, each of these illustrations is hand-drawn by a graphic artist, and then an animator comes into the process to create the animated sequence that you're seeing here. In this case, here you see an animated screen where we've, again, we've used some more stock imagery, so the little guy here is a stock image. Some hand illustration, but there's a lot of motion animation going on the screen. We're animating in text. And then I'll show you one last one. In this case, this is a illustration of a heart. So this heart was illustrated, had to be illustrated. Now there's a number of animations that go on top of that once you've done that. You get a sense of that. So I guess my question to you, if we call this one LMS, we call this one parachute, and we call this one heart, which do you think, oops, I didn't mean to click, which do you think takes the most effort? Hey, Sabrina, just quick check, can you still see my screen?
Yes, I can still see your screen.
Okay, I've lost my go-to-meeting little box, but I guess that's okay.
Oh.
So I guess I'll pause there and say that since I took away the suspense there and gave you the answers, is the fact that this one took the least amount of time, this one took the second most time, and this one took the most time, jive with what people's expectations would be. Any questions about that? So I'll walk through that. So in terms of content presentation, again, our definitions for levels 1, 2, and 3. Level 1, so 80% of content screens are made up of simple interactions. So these are native to a development tool. Drag and drop, text and graphics, multiple choice questions. 20% of the screens are more complex. I don't know if people are familiar with carousels. So it's a series of images which rotate through, or tab screens, these are more dense screens which have multiple layers of content, or hot graphics which have multiple spots on a screen that you can click and do click and reveals, or just simple animations like we saw with the parachute. Those are kind of a lot of that where the text is coming and going. Generally, simple animations we define as 5 transitions, no more than 5 elements. Graphics are stock or client provided with a consistent treatment throughout. Level 2 is, about 70% of the screens are made up of simple interactions. 25% are more complex. 5% of the screens, complex things are like the one we showed you with the flow of blood in the heart. Again, graphics are primarily stock photos, but there's some images are now starting to be illustrations or composed images that we put together. And then level 3 is, and I should put the disclaimer in here, we don't have a, level 3 is just an example of what level 3 might look like, but level 3 is kind of everything above level 2. So, less than half the graphics are using sort of standard screen layouts or interactions that you find in a tool or framework. Almost half the screens are more complex, things like composed graphics and carousels and animations. We have a few really more complex animations that we've put in there Again, there's a mix of different kind of graphics and illustrations that we've created. And again, these are at least the different criteria that we look at in the context of content presentation. And again, just put it back to you all. Is that similar to how you look at things? Do we miss something? Anything you would add to that list? The next one is technical requirements. So technical requirements are really, a fair amount of e-learning when we're using a commercial authoring tool or a framework in HTML or Flash. We can just drop content in and it works. But often we need to go beyond that. So technical requirements are, what's the effort we're putting in beyond sort of the standard functionality of a tool or framework that we're leveraging to develop the content. So an example of that would be a course like this, where you see the scoreboard over here. So as I go through these different questions, if I get a question right, I'm hitting submit, and now you see I've sort of moved up the scoreboard here. And it seems relatively simple, but in essence, our developer who's putting a course like this together, we had to create a custom object. We had to then assign points and values and variables to each of these responses, and then write a little piece of programming in the back that sort of tied your answers together with the score meter that's on the right. Seems simple, but again, a little bit of effort, extra effort that needs to take place to accomplish that kind of experience. And I apologize, I don't have a demo of this, but this is another kind area like this, and it's hard to see. But this was a game we had put together as part of used as a contest by Nikon for their distributors. So it's kind of a Who Wants to Be a Millionaire type of setup. So you had different ways of giving people more points per question. So it was a contest. There's actually really nice prizes. I think the winner of one of the contests got a helicopter ride over London in this case. So obviously you want everybody to do well on your quiz, which in essence was at the heart of it. But you didn't want you didn't want everybody to do that well, because you wanted a clear winner or loser. And the way they did that was to create all these different bonuses. So you could sort of double down on things. You could put a time constraint on you. So each of these had an impact on how many points you got per question to create a true bell curve in terms of the outcomes of the contest. Thought I had this, but yeah. So this picture shows you in this first one. I should have come back to this. It shows as I work through that, each module is summarized by how you did on your given score. So that's how you can you collect more and more people call it it's elements of gamification. So that kind of user experience that you might create. So again, coming back to the criteria we look at when we're looking at the effort involved in a project. Level 1, basically, you're using a commercial authoring tool or a framework that maybe your partner has developed internally, and you're basically using the functionality that's built into it. You're not making any changes or extensions. Level 2 is you're still using a commercial tool or framework, but there's some extensions that are required to meet the need. So simple things like even a completion certificate is emailed at the end of the course. Sometimes takes a little bit of effort. We've worked with tools that adding a closed caption box takes a little bit of effort. And then things like the scoreboard that I showed you. Then level 3 is, we need to, you're generally writing directly in the programming language, so the Nikon quiz is a good example of that, where there's no authoring tool out there, at least that we're aware of, that gives you that kind of flexibility into it. So you need to kind of code from ground up to create that kind of user experience. The final criteria we use, dimension we talk about is testing. And for those who've been in the industry for a period of time, you know, it's a little bit of what's old is new again today with the introduction of HTML or HTML5 and the movement of the industry from a Flash-based world to a much more to using HTML much more broadly. The reason for that, the primary reason for that, Flash was a plugin. Flash was the same in all browsers, or basically the same in all browsers, as long as you had the right version in here. HTML gets rendered differently by every browser and every version of every browser, so it introduces the idea of potentially significantly more testing that we all need to be aware of. You know, here's an example of this is a, I think it's html5.org site. So if you could just go to this site, you can it'll tell you how your browser scores in terms of compatibility with HTML5. So yeah, this is just an example. I think I was running Firefox when I did this, and you know, obviously there's some things here that aren't supported on my browser. It tells me some things are buggy, and this was about a third of the total report that was required. So testing has become much more variable in terms of the expectations that we want to set with clients, and just creating a shared understanding of what's the effort that needs to be done to put the course to a place where you're confident and comfortable with being able to deploy your organization. So level one is what most of us have thought about testing and quality assurance historically. So we're doing quality assurance for grammar, punctuation, consistency throughout. But we're just testing the functionality to convert functionality as course functionality as specified, and testing is conducted on one browser and based on something that's within the spec of the tool that says it works. Often that's not enough today, so we need to extend that. So obviously we're still doing quality assurance, but we're starting to add more browsers, more configurations to make sure that this course works across the different configurations that are available in your organization. And then even more is, when we want to start to deploy courses on tablets and smartphones, we start to extend that. So often a tool will work on, a course developed in a specific tool may work on more browsers, more devices, more operating systems than are in the spec, because that company hasn't at this point officially confirmed that, but it doesn't mean it won't work. But it absolutely takes testing to confirm that, and often takes a degree of sort of tweaking at the end to make sure that content renders as it's supposed to. So those are the 5 criteria, or 5 of the criteria that we look at as we try to assess the effort for a given course. So at this point am happy to open the floor for any questions you may have, and understand if this sort of aligns with your experience as well, if there's other things we should be thinking about and adding that you've come across. Anybody have anything there? I can do that. So someone's just asking, can we click back to the testing screen? Excuse me. And I'm happy if you guys want, anybody wants to send me a note, happy to share these slides with you. And I actually have a Word version that sort of integrates all the different components that you see, like these tables that integrates it all. Happy to send that to you as well. Yeah, I'm happy, as I mentioned. If we can just automatically send it out, good suggestion. Thank you. So somebody's asking, will this be sent to participants after the end of the session? So absolutely happy to do that. Good. Any other questions or comments? Ron, I'll be honest with you. We have hit the record button, and generally it's pretty good. But with GoToMeeting, it's always a little bit of a roll of the dice. But assuming it is, we will make it available. And in the follow-up with the slides, we can tell you where that's posted, probably up on SlideShare. Great. Give you about 30 more seconds, and we'll say thank you to everybody, wish everybody happy holidays, and let you get on with the rest of your day. Okay. Well, thanks, everybody, for taking a few minutes this morning. Great. Okay. Have a terrific day, everybody. Thank you.